So we're looking for advice and hints and cheat codes, if you will.
Probably want to know how to do some coding. I think almost every job that I saw that was relevant for a mathematician involved coding in one shape or another. Python is super easy to learn, especially with ChatGPT. I would not recommend using ChatGPT to just generate all your coding, but certainly for learning, download Python, start playing around with it.
Greetings. Welcome to Eric's Angle, the podcast for Iowa State mathematics students. I am your host, Eric Weber, chair of the mathematics department at Iowa State University. Today's guest is not an alumni of our program, but he's a name that many of us know. He is Gabe Khan, and he was an assistant professor in our department until December of 2024. He has now moved on to become an analyst at J.P. Morgan in Columbus, Ohio. I'm welcome, Gabe, to my program here to talk about mathematics opportunities in the finance industry, finance and insurance, and also to talk a little bit about his children's book that he just recently wrote. So please welcome Gabe Khan. Hi, Gabe. Thanks for appearing on Eric's Angle.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story as a mathematician?
Okay, so I went to Ohio State for my PhD program, worked on complex geometry there, so worked with Fangyang Zhang, did stuff related kind of to geometric analysis, so that's studying PDEs on manifolds, especially with non-Kähler stuff. After finishing, I went up north to our arch rivals at the University of Michigan for a few years. So I had to, hide all my Ohio State stuff and was working on something called information geometry, which takes probability spaces or parameterized families of probability measures and thinks about them geometrically. And then after that, after 2 years there, applied to Iowa State and was very, very happy to be at Iowa State for 4.5 years. Got to meet everyone there. And then just at the end of 2024, so starting in January, I moved back to Ohio, back to Columbus, and am now working at Chase in Polaris. So just a brief history.
Well, let's go further back in time. So
Further
when
back in
when did
time.
you yeah, when did you really start becoming gravitated towards mathematics as an academic pursuit?
So I think if you ask my parents, it'd be something like third grade,
Hmm.
something like that. I remember, my dad's a mathematician, so I remember like playing around with numbers, stuff like that. I guess as an undergraduate, I was deciding between math and physics, and what made the decision was that I couldn't fit a physics class in my first semester. Like it just didn't work in the schedule. So it was like pure random chance.
Just
Like,
happenstance.
yeah, just happenstance that I ended up, I could take the calculus class, but I couldn't fit the physics class, and that like set me on the track of doing math rather than physics. I'll say probably it was about sophomore year of college where I really started taking it seriously and really working hard um, to.
And then when you ultimately decided to pursue math at the undergraduate level, what were you thinking at that time for a career trajectory? Were you thinking grad school at all?
Yeah, definitely.
I guess if your dad was an academic, is an academic.
Yeah, I think I was pretty much set on the grad school path. I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
Spent my senior year writing an honors thesis, and had done an REU the summer before. So
Okay.
I think I was reasonably familiar with at least the concept of research.
Hmm.
I
And
didn't
teaching.
apply. to enough graduate programs. So I think I was lucky to get accepted at a few places, but it seemed to have worked out. So
Yeah, it definitely has worked out for you. So, we'll come back to what you're doing now in a little bit, as far as working at Chase. Um, so you just released a new book, which we want to
yeah.
highlight. How
Okay,
about you
yeah.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this started when my son was born. So this was in 2020. I was thinking about how I would want to explain geometry to a child. Because I don't necessarily want him to be a mathematician, but I did at least want to explain what I was doing. So, my background's in geometric analysis. There's kind of one story from geometric analysis that like comes to mind that everyone knows to some degree, which is the Poincare conjecture. And I was also coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, writing my first paper related to Ritchie flow stuff. So it's like, okay, this is something I really want to write about. Learn more. This is something to share with the kids. So they started as like these very rough sketches. A family friend had sent us, I think it's called Bayesian Statistics for Babies. And but there's a series of books by Chris Ferry. They're a bunch of like very, fancy sounding scientific titles for babies, and they're these wonderful board books. Um, and so my original idea was something I was going to write Richie Flow for babies, and that was the original idea. And then it took years because, had real research to be working on and, stuff to be doing. So as my son got older and he kind of outgrew board books, it was like, okay, maybe I don't want to write a board book because that is, by the time I finish, he's going to not want to read it anymore. So just kept on working on it, doing some sketches, erasing lots of sketches, writing, rewriting. And then at the end of 2024, like the last semester at ISU, it was like, okay, this is probably the last semester I'm going to have the ability to like really focus and work on this. So I put in a real focused effort to finish writing it and um, finished it up and have spent the last few months like figuring out logistics of self-publishing. But
Hmm.
overall, it seems like it's gone reasonably well. It was a fun experience, although I'm not sure I'll do it again. So it took an enormous amount of time.
I bet it did. Yes. Tell us more about the illustrations.
So they started as very rough sketches, just kind of done on a tablet. And once it started to get a little bit more serious, I was using Procreate, which is a sketch application for the iPad. I was actually using it to teach for a while too, because I could, write all sorts of figures and change which layer you're on so you could, scroll and do all that sort of stuff. So, you know, basically, I was going to the library with my son, reading a ton of ch kids' books, being like, okay, this is something that I like. This looks kind of cool. Like, I kind of want to try and do something like that. And then just trying to sketch those things at back with, on the iPad. I will say that there's a huge, huge amount of erasing. The wonderful thing about Procreate is that you really don't need any artistic skill to do it. My brother is an artist, so I kind of have seen firsthand what like actual art ability is like. I don't have that at all. What I do have the ability to do is erase. So, you do one stroke, it doesn't look how you want it to, you can move it around, you can erase it, you can move layers around. So, um, it did take a very long time, but I guess maybe patience can make up for lack of ability. I think that's
Aha.
that's the trick to these. And then once they were finally like all sketched out, I ended up using Adobe InDesign and a little bit of Photoshop for the to put it all together.
Hmm.
I will mention that and now like Photoshop is amazing because now it even has like the generative fill. So you can like describe what you want and it can put it in. And I didn't want to use too much AI imagery because I felt like, you know, kind of it's very easy to just make something and just like populate it with AI images, and that maybe doesn't have the same effect. But there are a few things, a few layers that were like generatively produced, so I should
Hmm.
make that disclaimer.
Hmm.
So for instance, like there's one page where there's a black hole, and the black hole was all done by hand, but the starlight in the background, that's generatively created. But yeah, I mean, so if you're at ISU, you have access to InDesign and Adobe Photoshop. The suite comes with, or at least it did when I was there.
Yeah,
So
the
you should,
students and faculty can download
yeah,
it and use it.
yeah, download it, play with it. It's wonderful. It's really,
Hmm.
really cool software. So definitely recommend playing around with that.
Yeah, the illustrations are beautiful. And just to clarify for our audience, you actually created, I mean, other than the AI stuff that you just mentioned, you created all those images
Yeah.
because I noticed that there's a reference list of images and you maybe use those as inspiration, but none of them were actually copied.
Yeah, nothing was directly copied. I mean, some of them are similar enough that if you see the original, you'll recognize, the kind of one-to-one correspondence. There's a drawing of a modular form, and that is basically I'm blanking on the name right now. Let me pull that up so that give my proper accreditation. So that is by David Lowry Duda wrote a paper on visualizing modular forms. So I
Mm.
went into Mathematica, used basically his code from the paper to like create the thing and then sketched it from there.
Oh, that's
So
really cool.
a lot of them are d definitely lifted from other sources. They're not all my ideas.
Well, we'll flash as part of our ultimate production. We'll flash a location first for people to find your book, although it probably
Okay,
won't be easy
awesome.
to find by Google, but
Yeah.
we'll also help our audience find it as well.
Thanks.
So tell us about your transition from an academic environment to a non-academic environment.
It's definitely a change of pace. It's a very different, I guess when you're in academia, you get used to the cycles of semesters, having all the students come in the fall and, that mad rush. And then, you have the grading at the end of the semester and then there's a break and, there's kind of a pattern. At least in my experience, industry does not follow the semester schedule. I think that might be a reasonably universal phenomena. So there's definitely a change there. But overall, it's been pretty good. It's it's a big change, but they both have their ups and downs, I guess. Um,
So as you were looking for that, this type of position, like what were the opportunities that you saw as you were applying, and what are some opportunities maybe you see now that you've been in a position for a while? Like we're trying to help our students get a sense of career possibilities after finishing a math degree at Iowa State. And so you've actually done it.
yeah.
And so we're looking for advice and hints and cheat codes, if you will.
Okay. So I don't think there's not too many like there's probably not so much advice that holds universally.
Hmm.
Maybe the only thing I can think of is that you probably want to know how to do some coding. I think almost every job that I saw that was relevant for a mathematician involved coding in one shape or another. The wonderful thing nowadays is that Python is super easy to learn, especially with ChatGPT. I would not recommend using ChatGPT to just generate all your coding. I think that's called vibe coding. It's maybe not like the worst thing to do, but AI definitely has some quirks when it generates code, and some of those quirks go very badly when you try to generate a lot of code. So, but certainly for learning, download Python, start playing around with it. SQL is another thing that is very worthwhile to know. There's some limitations of Python. It doesn't like huge data sets, or it doesn't play re well with like very large data sets. And there's some things that you can do in SQL that are just a little bit better. Um, at least for me, when I was making the transition, I enrolled in something called the Erdős Institute, which it's a program for helping people with PhDs transition to industry. Um, I'm not so sure that that's super relevant if you're an undergrad, but I would definitely recommend the program if you're a PhD student and you're trying to make the transition. And that was very helpful because it gave a lot of the basics of how you should structure a project, what a machine learning project really is, some of the basics of data science. So that was really helpful. Other than that, oh, I guess one other thing that's worth knowing is learning how to use Git. So GitHub is kind of project organization. This is also, it's a good skill to know even if you're in academia. You don't necessarily want to use GitHub itself, but for instance, a lot of us write our papers on Overleaf. I don't know. Do you do that, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. So one thing, Overleaf it's an online law tech website, basically. You can build projects and structure things. And really learning how to use directories, version control, all those things within Overleaf is a really, really useful skill. And that
Hmm.
carries over to thinking about project organization within GitHub as well, that similar sorts of ideas of keeping things organized. Because
I've
at
had
least
just sorry, just to emphasize the point, I've had Git forced upon me through collaborators. I've got collaboration with the computer science folks that use Git for version control and sharing files versus like Cybox or something. And then one of my former students really preferred using Git versus a cloud storage or even Overleaf. So I I would I would confirm what you're saying about understanding Git is a very useful skill.
Yeah, it's within academia, something like Cybox is definitely good for what you need, holding course notes or something like that, or whatever usage. Um, it's used it's used at ISU, like it's a great tool. Um, I guess the problem is that if we didn't have, say 40 or 100 people using it, but now you had 2,000 people using it. And they all had their like slightly different conventions for how they name things, and everything was there. It would get pretty unmanageable pretty quickly. So that's the sort of thing that Git is very useful for.
Mm.
It's going to feel like total overkill if you're just using it for your own work. But the reason to use it is that then if you're in a much bigger environment and you have a lot of people working on things, not having version control can go wrong, and very wrong quickly. So,
So you mentioned coding. I'm curious how much coding you actually do in your position now, but I wanted to ask also, as you were doing your job search, were you finding positions where during the interview process they gave you an exam, like give us some code to solve this problem or some like elementary statistics types questions? Because I'm hearing this is becoming more common.
yeah. So, all right. So, yes, some of the interviews were even more intense than that, where it wasn't even elementary statistics questions. There was one where it was like multiplication of two-digit numbers, but the catch is that you had to do those sorts of problems in your head. You couldn't use a calculator, and you had to do like 80 or so in like some very short amount of time. So it was just like all out, like it was pure speed. Like, can you
Wow.
86 times 41? I can't do that in my head right now, but like,
Hmm.
and you're expected to get a full score, you needed to be able to do that in like 4 or 5 seconds. I did not pass that. That is not the sort of skill. Like, I think that I'm getting a little bit older. My brain is slowing down a little bit. That's something that like it's almost like playing a video game. Like, there's probably There's probably people who have the ability to just think that quickly. So yes, there were some of those. There's other ones where the first interview was just statistics questions, basically, probability questions. That's pretty common. Some of the other ones were more informal, like a get to know you interview first, and then some technical stuff, but nothing. I think it really depends on where you're applying to. If you are applying, if you want to work for a hedge fund or something like that, you should be prepared for multiple rounds of technical interviews and to be prepared to answer questions like that. It's almost like studying for the qualifying exams, a little bit
Wow.
like that.
That's harder to do as an undergraduate student studying for qualifying exams.
Well, yes, definitely, but it's also if you're an undergrad and you're used to studying for exams, that it's a good skill to take forward. You know,
Hmm.
when you're getting to your senior year and you're like, oh, I'm so glad to be done with exams, you might want to think that you might have one more that you need to take, and that's the first few rounds of job interviews. So don't, use all those good skills that you learn taking exams for to get past that hurdle.
Now, there is a really golden nugget of advice for students, like not just math students, but probably many of the technically oriented students that don't start coasting senior year and sloughing off exams because there may be more exams coming down the road.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably true. At least, I remember senior year of undergraduate. It was definitely like, you're ready to be done. But just having all those good study habits and, exam taking strategies can be helpful for interviews because oftentimes you're having to think on your feet. And, it's a little bit stressful too, because
Hmm.
it's kind of an important exam, as it were.
So tell us a little bit about your day-to-day activities. Like, what does your typical day look like?
Um, it can vary depending on what needs to be done. I do find myself writing a fair amount of code. Something that I'm really trying to learn, and I see there's people who are extremely good at it, is writing like very professional production level code. Um, and that's something that is going to take time to learn. I'm certainly not there yet, but that is something that I've been trying to emulate, trying to learn more about. I would definitely recommend for anyone else who wants to do it, like think about what it means to write good code for other people to use.
Can I
I
interject
like
here? So, is this code that is just for your own usage in your job, or is it actually code for other people to also other people to use as well?
Well, I think that it's important to one of the lessons that I've taken from academia is that it's very important to have everything that you do be reproducible. So sometimes you're doing some analysis and you might be the only person who, you'll share the results of the analysis.
Hmm.
But I think it's important to make it so that other people, if they want to, can rerun it or adapt it or make it useful for other purposes as well. So, by and large, I think for the most part, the code is not the end result. It's like what it produces that ends up getting reported on, but still having those best practices of making it so that other people can use it is important. I also like to think about questions where you have to use a little bit of statistics, I guess. Because as a mathematician, I'm definitely an amateur in the world of statistics, but one advantage that having a math background is helpful for is that it's possible to learn what you need from statistics for a given project, without having to spend a huge amount of time doing it. So, been reading Cassell and Berger and all sorts of, some stats papers occasionally, and just thinking about what I need to take from that for the questions I'm trying to answer.
Hmm. So you alluded to something that I've been trying to convey to our students, is that I think is an important point is learning how to communicate findings to other people. Like, we as mathematicians, I would say generally we like sitting in our office or, at our desk and really just pondering the question we're trying to answer, the problem we're trying to solve. And once we've solved it, we have a little, celebration, or as one of my high school teachers used to say, get the warm, fuzzy feeling on the inside.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we sort of not think so much about the conveying that to some audience of some sort. But that's a really, really important step. And in your type of environment, that's almost like that's what is expected.
Yeah. It's still something I'm working on. I fully agree. I think it being able to communicate is very, very important, but I don't know that I have any secret advice on that. Other than just practice, ask people, get feedback. But yeah, it's a hard skill. Because math is definitely rewards the ability to think for something on a long time, solve it. There is some amount of care that goes into writing a paper, but you're generally writing papers for other people who are experts in the field. Like the referees are going to be people who are as knowledgeable about the subject or nearly as knowledgeable as you are. So you can write at a certain level of technicality that you can't if you're trying to communicate to a more general audience. So yeah, I wish I had a secret for how to communicate to a broader audience, but I think it just takes practice and it's not something that comes naturally. So it's something I have to
Hmm.
work very consciously on.
Hmm. I would say the secret is simply acknowledging that this is important and
Yeah.
to be prepared for it, whether we've, fully developed the skills. It could be something that's even a lifelong development. I mean, I would say teaching is somewhat similar to this, where you have, the teacher has expertise and they're trying to convey that expertise to um, more like a general audience. And that is a lifelong honing process, I would say, for many of us who really take teaching seriously. And so I would say that the the type of context that you're describing is has a lot of similarity to that. But the point is simply to recognize that.
Yeah. I think that's a good, I think all of these skills are kind of lifelong skills. I mean, I always want to be trying to improve like my statistics. Like I'm starting at a baseline. I should always be trying to improve my coding. I should always be trying to improve my ability to communicate. And I think that's a good mindset to have just in general. I mean, in
Yes.
academia, you're always trying to like improve your ability to do research, right? To, prove the next thing, to understand things better. And I think that's a healthy mindset to have, to never kind of stop learning.
Yes, I agree totally. So now that you no longer inhabit an academic environment, are you still going to be producing YouTube videos like you've done in the past?
I think the YouTube videos will be on hold for the foreseeable future.
Hmm.
Because I think so. The first issue is that it's tied to my Iowa State email, and that will go away eventually. The other thing is that it's also a very time-consuming process. Um, Part of the reason I made that YouTube channel was to communicate math research to a broader audience, and it was like, okay, this is something that is important to do instead of just writing papers and having a small group of people read them, I wanted to try to communicate more broadly. But now that I'm outside academia, there's not, I'm not doing research as a as my day-to-day job in the same sort of way.
Hmm.
And it doesn't make sense to spend a huge amount of time producing like a polished YouTube video on research. So, um, at least for the time being, that's on hold.
Hmm. Maybe someday you'll be able to pick that back up.
Yeah, maybe. I do think it was helpful to learn how, you know, I find that when I'm watching myself on video, I have all these feelings of like, oh, I constantly say or there's all sorts of things, and having to edit YouTube videos and watch it definitely helped me with presentation skills. So it was a useful
Yes,
experience.
absolutely. And maybe someday you'll be sort of outward facing position at some large organization. You'll not be a spokesperson, but you'll be, somebody that can convey these important messages.
Maybe. I like the down in the dirt, like, gritty and out, that's what you do as a mathematician. It's like you're often just sitting with pencil and paper trying to figure something out, and that's kind of what I enjoy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
we'll see.
does it ever feel like research? I mean, I'm picturing, you're trying to develop code that will do something, and you sort of have to feel out what it is that you actually are trying to accomplish, and then it might take a few iterations. And so,
Yeah,
is there an element of that?
yeah, definitely. There's certain the research I guess I don't often use formal math ideas. I have been trying to learn a bit of Hamiltonian Monte Carlo or markup chain Monte Carlo. So there is some symplectic geometry. I have been actually, getting to use differential geometry again. But for the most part, it's not super advanced math, but yeah, oftentimes you are trying to understand some pattern or some behavior, and having that idea, that math background or that research background of like, what is going on? How does this work? How can I, how can I predict this thing? That is very helpful. So yeah, in that way, it's very, very similar to doing research. There is like the long periods of just kind of like sitting at a desk trying to figure something out. Your first few iterations failing miserably until it eventually like something comes through. So that is very similar. And I do think having a math background was very helpful, or at least just a research background was very helpful for developing that skill.
Hmm. So to say it slightly differently, it sounds like you're describing a situation where you're not just using pre-canned techniques or pre-canned um, code solutions. You're actually developing solutions on your own to a particular problem.
So mo Sometimes there's something that you have to develop a little bit. A lot of times the techniques themselves are fairly standard. I mean, a lot of times you're just doing linear regression. Um, but to figure out what the right input should be. Um, so there's a anecdote that the Erdős Institute likes to give, and I think this is a good one for explaining things, is say I'm working at a library and I want to predict whether how likely it is that a book is going to get returned. And what I have is I have all the library card numbers, all of the history of things being checked out, all of the let's say the days of the week, all of that data from the previous, from what happened before. And I want to say, okay, this book has been checked out. How likely is it to get back to the library? And the insight there is like, okay, if I'm building a model for this, I have what should the drivers be? What should I actually put into the model? And the insight from, I'm not explaining it very well, but from the Erdős Institute or this like one podcast is that what you should do is you should look at whether people who have checked books out of the library have ever been delinquent before. Like that is the right thing to look at. That is probably like the most predictive thing for whether the book is going to get returned, whether or not the person who's checked it out has ever, not returned a book before. So I think that's the sort of thing. Oftentimes it's not that your model is going to be super complicated, but you have to figure out what to put into the model.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to do some processing to figure out the right thing.
Hmm. Well, Gabe, this has been phenomenal catching up with you. So I'm
Thank you.
thankful that
Yeah.
you've been able to appear on this podcast. And any last words that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I guess So when I was applying, I got a lot of rejections.
Mm,
And I think that that is a fairly universal thing. When you're applying to jobs, there's a lot of rejection. Even if you're a wonderful candidate, even if you think that you're going to be an amazing fit, it's just, it can be demoralizing, but just keep on keeping on, keep on applying. And if you do enough, things are likely to work out. So that'd be my final takeaway.
mm. That's good advice. Perseverance. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
important in pretty much any endeavor is perseverance, but it's certainly
Yeah.
true when it comes to finding a job.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Gabe.
Yeah. Thank you.